I always thought my home was my castle, a private sanctuary where I could truly be myself. That illusion shattered the moment I stepped into my kitchen and locked eyes with Karen, our neighbourhood's most notorious HOA board member. She stood there, clipboard in hand, her presence an unwelcome invasion. She had used her master key to enter without permission, all for a routine inspection. If you've ever felt powerless against your HOA's rules or wondered about the legal limits of their authority, my story will be an eye-opener. Join me as I recount the day my privacy was violated, and I learned that sometimes the biggest threats to our homes come from those who claim to protect them. This encounter would spark questions about the very foundations of HOA power and homeowners' rights. I woke up that morning, the sun streaming through my bedroom window, casting a warm glow across my cozy sanctuary. The gentle hum of the air conditioner and chirping birds created a peaceful ambiance. I stretched, feeling the soft sheets against my skin, oblivious to the chaos that would soon unfold in my quiet suburban oasis. As I padded to the kitchen, my bare feet sinking into the plush carpet, I felt content. My home was my refuge. I poured coffee, inhaling the rich aroma, and gazed at my meticulously maintained backyard. The thought of anyone violating this space never crossed my mind. I showered and dressed, surrounded by personal touches that made this house mine. Family photos adorned the walls, each a cherished memory. My vinyl records sat in the living room, a testament to my passion for music. Grabbing my keys, I noticed Tom watering his lawn. We chatted briefly. "Have you heard about Karen's latest crusade?" he asked. "She's going on about property inspections, saying she'll clean up the neighbourhood." I chuckled, not realising the weight those words would carry. Locking the door, I felt secure. Yet, as I drove away, an inexplicable unease settled in my stomach. I chalked it up to extra caffeine, but looking back, I wonder if it was a warning. My workday flew by. As I drove home, the setting sun cast long shadows across manicured lawns. Everything looked normal, but as I approached my house, something felt off. The curtains were drawn. Hadn't I left them open? My heart raced as I parked and walked to the front door. The petunia-filled flower box, usually cheerful, now seemed to mock me. I reached for my keys, hand trembling, when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. As I inserted my key into the lock, the metal scraped against something unfamiliar. My heart skipped a beat. The mechanism felt different, as if someone had tampered with it. I pushed the door open slowly, my senses heightened to every creak and groan of the old hinges. The scent hit me first. A cloying floral perfume hung in the air, so unlike the subtle vanilla fragrance my wife favoured. It was unmistakably Karen's signature scent, the same one that often announced her presence at HOA meetings before she even entered the room. I stepped inside, my footsteps echoing in the unnatural silence of my own home. The living room looked undisturbed at first glance, but something felt off. The throw pillows on the couch were arranged differently, and the blinds were drawn shut, casting long shadows across the room. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding strangely small in the emptiness. No response. As I moved further into the house, I noticed more subtle changes. A cabinet door left slightly ajar in the hallway. A picture frame on the wall tilted at an odd angle. Each detail sent a fresh wave of unease through me. I reached the kitchen doorway and froze. There, standing by the island counter with a clipboard in hand, was Karen. Her salt and pepper hair was pulled back in its usual severe bun. Her eyes narrowed as she scribbled something on her notes. "Karen," I managed to choke out, my voice a mixture of shock and anger. "What are you doing in my house?" She looked up, seemingly unfazed. "Oh, hello, I'm conducting the quarterly property inspection. Didn't you get the notice?" My mind flashed back to the stack of documents we'd signed when buying the house. Had we really agreed to this? "You can't just enter someone's home without permission," I sputtered. Karen's eyes narrowed. "As an HOA board member, I have the authority to inspect properties for compliance. It's all in the bylaws you signed." "What exactly are you inspecting?" I demanded, noticing her gaze sweep across our kitchen. "Well, for starters, your cabinet hardware doesn't meet HOA standards," she replied, tapping her pen against the clipboard. I felt my face flush with indignation. "You need to leave, now." Karen stood her ground. "I'm not finished. There are several violations I need to document." As we faced off in my own kitchen, I couldn't shake the feeling of violation. How had my peaceful suburban life turned into this nightmare? The next few days blurred together in a haze of anger and confusion. Every time I walked into my kitchen, I half expected to see Karen standing there with her clipboard, ready to pass judgment on my life. The sanctity of my home felt as fragile as a soap bubble. I dove into researching HOA bylaws and homeowner rights. My dining room table disappeared under a sea of papers and sticky notes. Late into the night, I pored over legal websites and community forums, feeling like a detective trying to solve a crime against my own peace of mind. The more I read, the more my frustration grew. For every clear-cut rule, there were exceptions and loopholes. I learned that HOAs can enforce community standards, but they can't simply barge into homes without notice or consent. Then I'd find a clause that seemed to contradict this, and I'd be back at square one. Reaching out to neighbours, I discovered Karen's inspections weren't isolated incidents. Tom, next door, told me about her showing up unannounced to measure his grass height. The Johnsons had been cited for having the wrong shade of beige on their window frames. I consulted a local property law attorney who explained that while HOAs have certain powers, they're not above the law. The Fourth Amendment protects against unreasonable searches, she told me, including overzealous HOA board members. The emotional toll was undeniable. I found myself jumping at every unexpected sound, wondering if it was Karen coming back. During dinner one night, my wife noticed my distraction. "You've been so quiet lately," she said, concern in her eyes. I sighed and explained my worries about our privacy and rights. She squeezed my hand. "We'll figure this out together." As I dug deeper, I discovered some shocking statistics. Nearly 25% of Americans live in communities governed by HOAs. Over 73 million people potentially subject to rules that can sometimes border on the absurd. Armed with this knowledge, I felt a shift in my perspective. The initial shock was giving way to determination. I knew Karen had overstepped her bounds, and I had the legal backing to prove it. The question now was how to proceed. Should I confront her directly, lodge a formal complaint, or take legal action? As I weighed my options, I realized this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about standing up for the principle of privacy, about drawing a line in the sand and saying, "This far and no further." I stood in my living room, surveying the space that no longer felt like my own. The weight of Karen's intrusion hung heavy in the air, a constant reminder that my sanctuary had been violated. I knew I had to act to reclaim my home and my peace of mind. With a deep breath, I set out on a mission to fortify my castle against future invasions. My first step was changing the locks. The click of the new lock sliding into place was satisfying, yet it did little to quell the unease that had taken root in my chest. I found myself constantly checking windows and doors, peering out at the street for any sign of Karen or her clipboard. The paranoia was exhausting, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she might return at any moment. After some research, I decided to install a security camera system. As I mounted cameras around the house, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of sadness. This was never the kind of neighbourhood where I thought I'd need such measures, yet here I was, turning my home into a fortress against the very people who were supposed to protect our community's interests. The psychological impact of Karen's invasion was profound. I spoke with a therapist who specialised in trauma, and she explained that privacy violations can lead to a persistent feeling of vulnerability. Her words resonated deeply as I described the constant state of alertness I now found myself in, jumping at every unexpected sound. Curious about how my neighbours were coping, I struck up conversations at the mailbox and over fences. The Johnsons had installed motion sensor lights after Karen cited them for their insufficiently illuminated walkway. Old Mrs. Peterson now kept her curtains drawn at all times, afraid of prying eyes judging her decor. As I delved into the legality of surveillance systems, I discovered a complex web of regulations. While it was perfectly legal to install cameras on my property, I had to be careful about their placement to avoid infringing on my neighbours' privacy. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, worried about violating others' rights while trying to protect my own. With each new security measure, I felt a small sense of control returning. Yet I knew that cameras and locks were just band-aids on a much larger issue. I needed a comprehensive plan to protect myself and my neighbours from unexpected HOA intrusions. I began compiling a binder of information, HOA bylaws, state laws on property rights, and contact information for local authorities. As I drafted a letter to the HOA board, firmly asserting my right to privacy, I felt a spark of determination ignite within me. This wasn't just about keeping Karen out. It was about standing up for the fundamental right to feel safe in one's own home. As I sealed the envelope containing my letter to the HOA board, a strange mixture of anticipation and dread settled in my stomach. The quiet hum of the air conditioner seemed to underscore the tension that had blanketed our once peaceful neighbourhood. The next morning I watched as my neighbours began their day. Mrs. Peterson scurried from her car to her front door, eyes darting nervously. The Johnsons' curtains remained stubbornly drawn. Small clusters formed on driveways and sidewalks, voices low and heads huddled together. Word of Karen's unauthorised entry had spread like wildfire, igniting emotions that had been simmering for years. Our monthly HOA meeting, typically a sedate affair, suddenly became standing room only. The community centre buzzed with nervous energy as neighbours filed in, clutching printouts of bylaws and property rights. As the meeting progressed, it became clear that our community was deeply divided. Some defended the HOA's right to conduct inspections, citing the need to maintain property values. Others passionately argued for increased privacy protections. According to a recent survey, nearly 70% of homeowners are satisfied with their HOA experience, one board member stated. But what about the other 30%? I interjected. Don't their rights matter? The room erupted into a cacophony of voices. I felt a surge of adrenaline as I realised this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every homeowner who had ever felt powerless in the face of arbitrary rules and overzealous enforcement. As weeks passed, I found myself at the centre of a growing movement. Neighbours began sharing their own stories of HOA frustrations. We organised a task force to review and propose changes to our community's bylaws. It wasn't always easy. There were heated arguments and moments of doubt, but I felt a sense of purpose I hadn't experienced in years. The incident with Karen had torn open old wounds, but it had also created an opportunity for healing. As we worked together to find a balance between community standards and individual rights, I saw a change coming over our neighbourhood. Fences that had been both literal and metaphorical began to come down. People started to look out for each other in ways they hadn't before. The day of reckoning finally arrived, a crisp morning that held the promise of change. As I stood on my front porch, watching the sun climb over the rooftops, I couldn't help but feel a mix of anticipation and trepidation. The formal complaints against Karen had been filed, the legal wheels set in motion. Now all we could do was wait. The waiting game became almost unbearable. Every ring of the phone, every knock at the door sent my heart racing. Once a certified letter arrived, and I fumbled to open it with shaking hands, only to find it was an unrelated HOA notice. Another time, a neighbour rushed over claiming to have insider information, but it turned out to be just gossip. As weeks dragged on, the tension in the neighbourhood was palpable. Some neighbours avoided eye contact, while others offered encouraging smiles. I knew that whatever the outcome, our community would never be the same. Finally, we received word that the HOA board had reached a decision. As I walked to the community centre, my neighbours fell in step beside me. The silence between us spoke volumes about the gravity of the moment. The board president cleared his throat, his face sombre as he addressed the packed room. After careful consideration, we have determined that Karen's actions were a gross violation of our community's trust and an infringement on individual privacy rights. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. I felt a surge of vindication, tempered by the sadness of seeing Karen's face crumple as the president continued. Effective immediately, Karen will be removed from her position on the board and face a substantial fine. The room erupted into chaos. Mrs. Johnson, our elderly neighbour, burst into tears of relief. The Thompsons high-fived each other while the Millers looked uncertain, whispering furiously. As the meeting adjourned, I found myself face to face with Karen. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but her voice was steady. "I hope you're happy now," she said. I took a deep breath. "This was never about happiness, Karen. It was about doing what's right." In the days that followed, our community began the slow process of healing. New policies were put in place to prevent future abuses of power. As I watched the ebb and flow of community life from my front porch, I felt a sense of pride in what we had accomplished. But I knew our work was far from over. The incident with Karen sparked a community-wide reassessment of HOA practices. We implemented a new system of checks and balances, ensuring no single board member could wield unchecked power. Neighbours who once kept to themselves now gather for potlucks and town halls, discussing ways to improve our community while respecting individual rights. I found myself attending every HOA meeting, even considering running for a board position. This experience has transformed our neighbourhood from a collection of houses into a true community, united in our commitment to fairness and mutual respect. Standing on my front porch, watching kids play freely in their yards, I feel a sense of pride in what we've accomplished together.